Good evening. My name is Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs. 30 years ago, next month, I arrived at Yeshivat HaMiftar. Exactly at the moment, as a matter of fact, the day before Yeshivat HaMiftar moved to Efrat. Arriving with my friend Shammai Glicksman, who I'm sure some of you remember, on a Friday afternoon. No one knew what we were talking about because Yeshivat HaMiftar had not yet opened. So they said, you better go to Rabbi Riskin. We knock on the door. Mrs. Riskin opens it up, sees two hungry yeshiva guys with a lot of suitcases. Glad to welcome Mrs. Riskin here tonight. And we're sorry that unfortunately Mrs. Bravender was unable to be with us. But that arrival at Yeshivat HaMiftar, like for so many young men, and like for so many young women at Michlelet Bruria, Medreshet Lindenbaum, was of course life-changing.
If I'm not mistaken, you were our first Muslim.
No, I was not. Well, I'm glad to receive smicha here and now.
I've always said.
But like for so many people, it was a life-changing experience, and the opportunity to have been involved with these two great men, our Kohen, our Levi, in different enterprises, in different teaching opportunities, as a student, as, dare I say, something of a junior colleague, has been so meaningful to me. Just by a show of hands, who here is a student of Rabbi Riskin and or Bravender? Who here has been an employee of Rabbi Riskin and or Bravender? When we gathered here 3 years ago to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Bravender Aliyah, I joked that I was once, like half of you, I was once the Menahel of Yeshivat HaMiftar. I feel a little bit like that night that Sonny and Cher got together on the Letterman show for their reunion. I was thinking of making that joke, but then I figured Rabbi Bravender would say, am I supposed to be Sonny or am I supposed to be Cher? And Rabbi Riskin would say, who are Sonny and Cher? But before we get into the content of our conversation tonight, I'd like to say a very, very heartfelt word of thanks to my good friend and my partner in crime for this evening, Reb David Katz of Or Torah Stone, who's involved in so many initiatives on behalf of Or Torah, on behalf of things that go on in our community, and behalf of the Jewish world, always behind the scenes. So I thank him very much for his help and his friendship with this. I should mention that I am sitting between the two laureates of the Nefesh B'Nefesh Bonei Tzion Award for Education. Last year, Rabbi Bravender. This coming year, Rabbi Riskin. And to say a word of thanks to our friends at Nefesh B'Nefesh who are sharing the live feed with their many, many tens of thousands of viewers all over the world. And was asked to mention to all of you listening in Chutz La'aretz, join us here in Eretz Yisrael. Nefesh B'Nefesh's flight's leaving on the hour, every hour. Again, please do turn off your phones, and when you turn them back on, or when you're next at your computer, of course, make it a point to visit the websites, the Facebook pages of Or Torah Stone, of Web Yeshiva and Atid, and generally to please support the work of these great institutions. We had passed out these index cards for people that might want to submit questions. Some people did. I don't know how much time we'll have to get to them towards the end of the evening. If you'd like to still jot them up and pass them up, you're welcome to do so. Rabbi Bravender and Rabbi Riskin, you arrived in 1965. Rabbi Riskin arrived in Eretz Yisrael in 1983. Now, looking back so many years later, after so many accomplishments, what would you each tell yourself, your younger self, as you were arriving? What wisdom now, in hindsight, could you have benefited from? Since you arrived first, Rabbi Bravender, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Rabbi Sachs. Mr. Dusa? Thank you, Rabbi Sachs. Actually, I came here tonight, I thought I would have to tell the jokes.
Something rubs off after all.
I see. The position has been usurped. The question is a difficult one to answer. But I would say this, I came to Israel because I was a member, and my wife at the time. We were both members long-standing of B'nai Akiva. And that was really the social context that I grew up in. I went to the Yeshiva Flatbush for 12 years. And the Yeshiva Flatbush offered many social opportunities. I don't think I took any of them, but instead, I went to B'nai Akiva. In B'nai Akiva, my thinking about things was formulated, and I believed every word that they told me. And as a result of this belief, which some of you may think was naive, we came an aliyah, Miriam and I, when I finished the smicha program in YU in 1965. Part of the reason may have been that I was very nervous about somebody giving me a job. So I thought leaving the country would be a terrific option. So Miriam and I went in 1965 and came an aliyah. And the story which I've told many times is that I thought I was actually going on aliyah to Kibbutz Levi on the plane. If anybody would have asked me, where are you going? I would have said Kibbutz Levi. In fact, Kibbutz Levi sent a tender. A tender is a machine on 4 wheels which doesn't really exist today, but it was very handy in those days if you were capable of sitting on a hard bench in the back. So they sent a tender to pick Miriam and I up with our luggage and take us to Levi. Miriam, in the way that she has acted subsequently on different occasions, also ordered another vehicle to take us to Yerushalayim, certain that sanity would overcome me on the plane, and that I would go to Yerushalayim because I had never been in Israel. I'd never been to Israel, never visited, never come, never gone, never learned, never done anything. No matter what they tell you, that's the truth. I was never in Israel. So Miriam said on the plane, again, wouldn't it be strange to come to Israel and not go to Yerushalayim? So I said, yeah, I guess. I mean, I didn't think.
To Israel at that point.
I said I'd never been to Israel. And I said, so I said, okay, but we have this tender from Levi picking us up. She says, no, she took care of that. And there was a car, and the car took us to Yerushalayim, where I stayed with somebody or other. And she had also made arrangements for us to get a room in some kind of Aliyah center, which in those days was not so crowded. We could have gotten 2 rooms, but well, we took 1 room, and that's how I came to Israel. But that doesn't answer the question. The answer to the question is, to me, the answer that I can give now to the question is that the one thing that they didn't tell me in B'nai Akiva, I mean, they told me things like, you could really only do the mitzvot in Eretz Yisrael, and there's only mitzvot Lod Ba'aretz, even if it's Drabanan, it also counts. And they told me all the great people who came in Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael through the ages. They never mentioned the great people who didn't come in Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. But so I figured that there's something, problem that they had. They got stuck in a doorway or something, but everybody wanted to come to Eretz Yisrael. But one thing they never told me, and they never told me, and they never mentioned, and it never occurred to me, that there were non-Jews, Muslims, who lived in Eretz Israel. And since I've come to Eretz Israel, the question of identity and relationships has been a question that I found most difficult and tried very hard to deal with in a more courageous way than B'nai Akiva was willing to do. So if I have to say, like, what is the thing about living in Israel that is most difficult? It's the tremendous responsibility that we as Jews, carrying the history of the Jewish people with us, have in straightening things out. That's my answer.
We came in 1983. Baruch Hashem, I had a wife and 4 children, and a 1/3 Misra job. I was a Rav Beit Sefer in the first Beit Sefer that there was in Efrat. Aseh Chaim. I had tried many summers before to get a job. They didn't even give me a shiur l'dugma to try me out. Now I think, and I know many of you from the classroom, I think you would agree I'm not such a bad teacher. But they didn't give me a chance even to try to be a teacher. And I wanted to come to Israel. I would have been very happy as a Rebbe in high school. I love to teach. I love students. I love Torah. Nobody would hire me. I found out later from one of the individuals who didn't hire me and then wanted a job with me. I asked him, why didn't you hire me? And he said, because you looked like you were 16 and you didn't have a beard. And that doesn't work in Israel. Anyway, we came with a 1/3 Misrat job, with our parents thinking that we were out of our minds. But there was one very fortunate encounter, and that was with Mashko. Mashko is a almost mythical persona, as I will explain. But I was giving shiurim at that time in Kibbutz Ein Tzurim in the summertime. And he came to one of the shiurim. And he said to me, what are you doing in America? We need you in Israel. I said, that makes 3 of us who think so. My wife and I and you. Nobody else seems to think so. So he says, I want to tell you something. I have a lot of experience. And if you want to do something in Israel, there's only one way to do it. You see, he said to me, if you really want a job, at one point, Mayor Dizengoff, the first mayor of Tel Aviv, was meeting with a number of Sachnut people. You know, Sachnut thinks they're really Israel, but they're not. Meeting with a group of Sachnut people. And they asked, how do you become the mayor of a city in Israel? And Mayor Dizengoff said, if you want to become the mayor of a city in Israel, you have to build the city. So Mashko said, I need a partner. Because when Golda Meir first, after the 6-Day War, saw Yehuda v'Shomron, she was very, very excited. She thought it was magnificently beautiful. And especially Efrat, she said, this is the ring around Jerusalem, and this will inspire and attract many high-class Olim, because Israel at that time was looking for high-class Olim. And she mentioned two particular places that had high-class Olim, South Africa and the United States. And she said, when there will be two sizable groups of people who are ready to put down a $1,500 deposit on a house in Efrat, then the city will be able to start to be built. Now, Mashko said to me, you know very well that South Africa and America are English-speaking countries. And he said about himself, he doesn't speak English. But I do. I should be his partner. Junior partner. Junior partner. I have to get the people. He'll get all the rest of the permissions that you have to get. And he said, you'll see. He said about himself, I'll become the mayor, and you'll become the rabbi of Efrat. Now, he couldn't guarantee any of those things. But I was pretty naive, and there was something about him that made me really believe that it was possible. We shook hands. I said, I'll try to get the people. Davened mincha on the spot. It was a beautiful spot, as Yehuda v'Shomron really is. Came back and told my wife. She's much more practical. She looked at me a bit quizzically and she said, don't you think you should check up on this Mashko person? And I said, I will. And I have the perfect person in mind because he had brought Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zechron Livracha. And Tova was an extremely honest person. If you insist, I'll ask Tova. I asked Tova about Mashko. She said, Mashko is Eliyahu Hanavi. That was enough for me. It was even enough for my wife.
Now looking back, what do you tell that young man and young woman that arrived with their small children?
I tell them, I'll tell you what I tell them. Another little story. We were in Efrat for a short time. It was very difficult. There were no bakeries, there were no fruit stores, there were no groceries, no telephones. One telephone that never worked. And at one point, my wife said, please, let's just go to Yerushalayim for a few hours. Get somebody to watch the kids. We did it. I think we went to a place called Maxie's at that time. The waitress comes, and she says, what do you want? I said, cafe. She said, Ness or Butts? I looked at my wife. We definitely needed a Ness. I said, I want Ness. And I thought to myself, and I think I shared it with my wife, that's a metaphor for Israel. It's either miracle or mud, depending how you look at it. Yeah, one line. And the waitress came, not Ness, not Butts, but Hafuch.
Very good.
And that is the miracle of Israel. It always comes out Hafuch and better than you ever thought it would be.
Excellent. You both, of course, are well known for your very early successes as young men in your careers. You were both, each in your own way.
We're still young men.
Each in your own way. First, Rabbi Riskin, you on the west side of Manhattan. Rabbi Bravender, once he arrived here and created the institutions that evolved into the yeshiva and to Berea and later Lindenbaum. And of course, in a small apartment on the west side, Lincoln Square Synagogue. I think you were 23 when you began? 24. Rabbi Riskin, Rabbi Bravender, you were about 25 when you started what evolved into the institutions that we all know. And there are some people in this room that even remember those early days. And what you both did really was countercultural. You were each in your own way a maverick at a time when people really tended to walk in well-trodden paths. What you did required vision and conviction. Neither of you peaked early in your careers, as happens with people that have early successes. You kept going on to continue to build and to innovate and to create new institutions and new ways of thinking about things. What in the world gave you then, as even younger men than you are today, the crazy idea that you could do this? Where did you draw your ideas and inspiration from? We'll start with you this time, Rabbi Riskin, briefly.
Listen, those who know me know that I don't really plan and I don't really pick up after myself. That, strangely enough, as it sounds, and it may sound, I really work on instinct. And if I think there's something that has to be done, Be'ezrat Hashem, I try to do it. And so far, in my life, the realization of the dreams have been much greater than the dreams.
But that characteristic was already part of you as a 23, as a 24-year-old? Where did that come from?
I think it was. I think it really was. Lincoln Square. Everybody thought I was crazy for Lincoln Square. They took a study that it was a religious community. It was Lincoln Center, intellectuals, opera house, artists, musicians, a-religious. A synagogue could never develop there. I was sure it could develop anywhere where there are Jews. I really believed it.
You just had this belief in your bones, in your gut. And Rabbi Bravender, where did you come to these ideas?
Which ideas? First of all, I should never start a sentence that way. First, I don't consider myself to be a maverick. At best, I'm an annoyance. But I'm not a maverick. I could explain why, but it's not important. Look, I went to Yeshiva University. Yeshiva University is a kind of a machine that produces rabbis. What you're encouraged in yeshiva to do is to do well at the exams that you're supposed to be taking. And besides that, when I went to yeshiva in my day, which was a couple of years ago, there wasn't much of a yeshiva life. It wasn't like people very much involved in learning. That is not to say that they weren't great scholars. Rabbi Schachter, Rabbi Willig, they were all contemporary. They were contemporaries of mine. And they, of course, were outstanding, but I wouldn't say that the atmosphere in the yeshiva Beit Midrash was nearly the atmosphere that you find there today, which is the result, of course, of Israel, of people coming to Israel and learning yeshiva, going back, etc. But when I came to Eretz Yisrael, series of good fortune events took place in my life. First, I met a friend from Yeshiva University, whose name was Jay Miller, Zichrono Livracha, who he deserves it. The people he influenced know how much he deserved. He deserves their praise. But Jay Miller said, "Come with me." And he took me to a kollel where I spent the better part of the next couple of years, and I learned in that kollel that there were people who just loved to learn. I'd never met them before. And then upon reflection, it seemed to me that Rabbi Soloveitchik also loved to learn. I didn't know that when I was in the shir. I didn't really realize what was going on. But in retrospect, it turned out that I understood that there's a difference between knowing things and learning. It doesn't mean that if you like to learn, you shouldn't know anything. No, that's not what I mean to say. What I mean to say is that learning is an experience of its own. I didn't know that till I came to Eretz Yisrael and became part of a kollel that was run at that time by a rabbi named Rabbi Elephant, Zichrono Livracha. So that gave me an idea. It gave me an idea that there was an experience that was worth having, even if you didn't become part of that world, the world where you're willing to give up everything to sit and learn. But the idea that a person could find some sort of sustenance from learning, from being part of an age-old tradition, by being able to define himself or eventually herself as a Jewish person through the books that the Jews have produced, was an idea that I found very compelling. And I went for it. I thought it was a good thing to do. As far as my ability to start institutions without knowing what I was doing exactly, I think that, although I don't suggest this to others, but the fact of the matter is that I never realized what it was that I was undertaking from a logistic point of view. It never meant much to me. So I started an institution. I didn't realize that you also needed money. But the truth of the matter is that if you're doing something worthwhile, eventually a little bit of money will come trickling in. And finally, right, when I thought that the day had been done, then Rabbi Riskin appeared and saved the day.
Speaking of that, the perfect segue, speaking of that day that Rabbi Riskin came into on his white horse, we found the last copy of the famous poster, "Building People to Build a World." You are still young, but in this picture, you're both really quite a bit younger. Rabbi Chaim Bravender, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, two dynamic leaders, two dynamic institutions. Now they are one. Those three last words on the poster have been the fodder of more Purim spiel lines than anything else I know. The poster's now available on eBay, I think. What are your you must have met in Yeshiva College. Rabbi Riskin, you're a drop older than Rabbi Bravender, or drop ahead of him in school. What are your first memories of each other? What are your first memories of then later that time that the two institutions merged?
Well, the fact is that we knew each other at yeshiva, no question. I don't remember Rabbi Bravender in the dormitory. Were you in the dormitory?
The Reuben door.
The Reuben dorm. Yeah.
You were in the other door.
I was in the other door. That's why I don't remember. But what was really happening was that I believe both of us, in the beginning it was he in Israel and I in America, were doing very much the same thing. We were teaching people who did not come from yeshivot. I think we both understood that they really had a tremendous advantage not having gone to yeshivot. They often learned wrongly in the yeshivot and didn't truly learn how to learn. And I think we both believed very deeply that all you have to do is teach Torah properly and teach Torah. Teach it, not about it, as Rabbi Bezdin used to always tell us. Teach them how to read a text, how to learn a piece of Gemara, how to figure out a Tosfos. That will do its own magic and will teach. And we both, I think, really independently believed very strongly in women's learning and women's learning Torah Shabbat Peh. I started a kolelet in Lincoln Square, a women's kollel. Rabbi Bravender, of course, Bruria. So we certainly knew of each other. We were doing very similar things. And then when I always spent summers in Israel, Rabbi Bravender invited me to teach in Yeshivat Miftar. And very soon after I made Aliyah, my daughter was married, Batya, our daughter, our eldest daughter, and she married Eddie, who studied Yeshivat Miftar. I had actually sent him there to go to study. And at their wedding, I was the Masada Kedushin as the bride's father. Rabbi Bravender read the Ksuma as the groom's Rebbe. I believe it was there, or at least they think it was there, and it sounds logical. We spoke about getting together in Eretz Yisrael with our institutions.
How do you remember your first memories of each other in college and later the merger?
I think I once went to Ein Tzurim and found you there. Met you in Ein Tzurim, I think. Talking to the microphone. No, you don't remember that?
I don't know how I don't remember.
I don't remember any of your stories. You don't remember any of my stories, right? But I remember that.
It's like an old married couple. I could be sitting with my parents.
Hey, come on, give us a chance. In YU, I remember Rabbi Risky walking up and down the dormitory on his floor. I don't know why I was there, studying for a test in Greek. Could that be?
That could very well be.
And I know that I wasn't involved, but Rabbi Risky was very involved in the YU outreach kind of programs. You went to seminars, and you went to Australia once.
Never went to Australia then, but I went to seminars.
Where'd you go?
Then I didn't go to Australia, no, only later.
But you didn't go any place on these seminar programs?
I went to seminars in Muncie. Muncie was enough of a quaint place for me to visit. From Brooklyn to Muncie, believe me, it's a big jump.
So I never had anything to do with seminar or with Balei Tshuva, but I gave a lot of shiurim in the context of Bnei Akiva, where, you had to excuse whatever you were doing by giving a shiur. So I was the one who did that much of the time. I remember that in Lincoln Square, when you were the rabbi in Lincoln Square once, I think it was engineered by Ron Balsheim. Remember Ron Balsheim?
Sure do.
So he decided, he was a very entrepreneurial type of person who was not always successful, but he was entrepreneurial. So he, I think, arranged, one time I was in Lincoln Square Wednesday night, you gave that class on the love life of the Avot or something like that.
Sounds right.
So that was like Wednesday night. So there was a shiur, you gave a shiur in Chumash, where you read the words. And then there were very few people who came. And then you talked about the love life of the Avos, and you couldn't get into the building. And in between, I think you must have davened, Mariv or something. In any event, you invited me to sit next to you on the, wherever that was. I'm trying to recall the old Lincoln Square synagogue, what it looked like. So there was a seat next to your seat. So I was able to sit there, and then you introduced me very nicely to the audience. Of course, no one had ever heard of me because I came from Brooklyn.
So did I, though.
I know, but you had overcome. I had that, I was just another person from Brooklyn. And so that's what I remember. In Israel, I remember we met in Ein Surim. We used to go in the summers and give shiurim, and you were preparing shiurim that you would give during the year, if I recall, as I recall. But what was the question exactly? The merger. The merger was, I think at the time, was a great idea. And all the naysayers were convinced. Not all, they weren't all convinced, but enough of them were convinced to make it. I thought it was a good idea in any event. Even though I think our dreams, Rabbi Riskin and myself, our dreams for what we wanted to do and what we wanted to accomplish were not the same. They weren't in conflict necessarily, but they weren't the same.
Well, speaking of that point, Rabbi Riskin, you are unabashedly and proudly, very much, and have been for very many years, the face of modern Orthodoxy as a religious community, as an ideological movement. Rabbi Bravender, I often say that you, in fact, are the most modern Orthodox person I know in your mindset. But there's no doubt that over the years you have become more connected to the right wing or the Haredi world, although intentionally you've worn a blue shirt and Crocs tonight. Just to show me that I'm wrong.
All three people sitting here are wearing ties.
It's true. I'd like to ask each of you, what do you think that the modern Orthodox world can learn from our Haredi brothers and sisters, and what can the Haredi world gain from the modern Orthodox world?
We'll take the bait first.
What can modern Orthodoxy learn from the Haredi world? I think two very important things. The first that they have already learned, and that was the importance of Talmud Torah. For the Zionist movement, Of course, Eretz Yisrael was very, very important. And conquering Eretz Yisrael, fighting back for Eretz Yisrael, was very, very important. And the army was very important, probably has become a major mitzvah for those of us who live here. And I believe that the commitment of Torah learning that the Haredis have, that the Haredis do have, is something that modern Orthodoxy learned, religious Zionism learned, and that's what gave birth to the Yeshivat Hesder movement. That was very, very important. The other thing that I think that the Yeshivat, that the modern Orthodox world could learn from the Haredi world is basically that modern Orthodoxy is not compromise Orthodoxy. That modern Orthodoxy believes in halacha, no fooling around, which means shachris mincha ma'ariv, which means commitment to halachic detail. One cannot and should not say, I'm modern Orthodox, so my wife doesn't have to cover her hair. I'm modern Orthodox, so I don't necessarily have to go to minyan every day. That's something, those are two things that I think that modern Orthodoxy must learn, and to a good extent, I think, are learning from the Haredi world. What does the Haredi world have to learn from modern Orthodoxy? To be religious. And I'm serious about that. They haven't learned to see God in the world. That's critically important as far as I'm concerned. And I can't, for the life of me, understand how people, especially who live in Israel, don't say Hallel on Yom HaTzmaut. Well, you don't have to necessarily say Hallel, but celebrate Yom HaTzmaut and feel the miracle of Yom HaTzmaut. They haven't learned it yet, and I feel sorry for them for not having learned it.
Rabbi Brabender?
Well, in this regard, I feel that to a certain extent I represent a more Haredi community. Not myself, but my family, all of my children would easily be classified as yeshivish or Haredi. I think that everybody, all the communities, always try to fix themselves if they can. And one of the ways that we can learn about how to fix ourselves is to look at others and see how they try to relate. I think that the word that we have to apply to Torah learning, the kind of Torah learning that kept us going as a nation, I mean, that's really the issue, is passion. Passion is not something that is easily acquired or that you can formulaically generate. But someplace in the world of Am Yisrael, there are people who have a passion for learning Torah, and those people have to become the ones that the rest of us try to emulate, try to connect to, try to join up with, because it's that passion ultimately that defines who we are and what we are and what we're doing and what we're doing. That became for me over the years. Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik in Boston, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein Zichrono Livracha here in Yerushalayim and in Gush Etzion, Rabbi Yashiv Rav Auerbach. I mean, these are people that anybody could connect with in a positive way. And that's really the issue. The issue is if I say that I'm modern Orthodox, does that mean that I can't be inspired by someone who doesn't look like me? That seems to me a dead loss across the board, and the same is true for the opposite. Now, it's not reasonable to say, well, if he won't do it, then I won't do it. I mean, because the issue is too great. We have to be able to find the people in the world who we can emulate, who we can follow, who we can be passionate with about being Jewish, which means learning Torah. Learning Torah. After I came in Aliyah, I think B'nai Akiva in America lost because they didn't emphasize Talmud Torah. At that time, NCSY, which I don't think was so much into the beginning learning Torah, but they emphasized the idea of learning Torah, and they won. They beat back the others because it became the defining note for the Jewish people, whether we know it or not. So again, my point is that the distinctions are important on a certain level, but they become irrelevant on the real level of passion for Talmud Torah. And we can find people to be passionate with if we just look hard and stay around and try to make ourselves into the passionate community that we should be.
Speaking of Talmud Torah and functions of speaking of Talmud Torah and the way things have played out over your careers within the modern Orthodox world, of course, there's no doubt that you are both closely associated with the advances, the so-called revolution in women's higher Torah study. When we consider where that movement has come, when we think about the direction that it has, the directions that it has taken, how do you assess those achievements at this point? Where do you think it's gone? Where do you think it should have gone? Where do you think it will yet be going in generations after your work will just be things of the history book? Rabbi Bravender, you start.
I haven't got a clue.
Okay. Rabbi Riskin speaks, I can disagree with him.
What
What am I going to say?
That's how you know how to say it, right? Correct. Look, obviously, I very much agree with Rabbi Bravender that it's the passion of Talmud critically important. And that too was, I think, the real kiddush of Bruria and Yeshiva Miftah. That it wasn't necessarily teaching philosophy. It was people will naturally become profoundly religious through Talmud Torah and allow Talmud Torah to do its job. Just teach it very well. I think that's what we both proved, and I think that was the success when we worked individually, and the double success when we worked together. I've always felt passionate about women learning Torah too. First of all, because my first Gemara Rebbe was my grandmother. And that was critically important to me growing up. Between the ages of 10 and 20, she was really my Rebbe and my Gemara Rebbe. She had learned from a father who was a Dayan. And I felt always, first of all, I thought at that time that every older woman Yiddish speaking from Europe knew Gemara. I didn't realize how unique she really was. But I always had a very real passion for women's learning. And Rabbi Soloveitchik was really the Rosh Yeshiva, the only Rosh Yeshiva when I was growing up, who felt very strongly about women studying Torah Shabbat Peh. And women being able to get expertise in Torah Shabbat Peh. He told me once that in Maimonides it was a co-ed school in effect, and the way he felt it was justified was because he wanted the women to study Gemara just like the men did. And if there were separate Gemara classes, it would never become like that. So this was always very important to me. And I've seen, certainly, with the Kolelet that I had in New York, and then with Beruria that I came to, thanks to Rabbi Bravender, and the development, it was really wonderful. And there are now yeshivot gvohot in Israel teaching Gemara and Torah Shabbat Peh on the highest of levels to women, even until they're receiving Heter Hora'ah, the ability to give halachic direction. I'm very proud of it. I truly believe in it. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, when I first asked him the question of women and halachic leadership, I had a yechidut with him for an hour and 45 minutes. My wife was with me. And it was a real tour de force. He went through with me every daf Gemara that talks about Balpeh, that talks about the Zechuyot Shel Ha'isha, and what applies and what doesn't apply. He said to me two things. He said, we in Chabad do not produce shluchim and their wives, emissaries and their wives. We produce shluchim and shluchot, men emissaries and women emissaries. We don't build shuls, we build Chabad houses. And often the women are the real power in those Chabad houses. And he said something else to me that I think is critically important. Od yishama b'yorei Yehuda v'chutzot Yerushalayim kol sason v'kol simcha kol chatan v'kol kala. Kol kala, he said, kol isha b'talmud Torah. That is Yirmiyahu's view of Yemot HaMashiach. And why will that bring Yemot HaMashiach? Because when women study and teach Torah, their Torah will be a Torah Chesed. Because women naturally, maybe because of carrying the baby and birthing the baby and giving up their lives, putting their lives on line, certainly, for each birth. Maybe that's a very important reason for that. Even the Rebbe didn't say that. But the Rebbe said, women major in Chesed. And when they become the teachers of Torah, the Torah will once again be the Torah Chesed it's supposed to be, and the Olam Chesed Yibaneh. That will bring the Mashiach.
I'd just like to add a point. My feeling has always been that you don't really make a revolution. What you do is you just open a door. And I came from a world, it was easy for me. I came from a world where women were respected and their credibility as academics and intellectuals and scholars did not fall short of the credit given to men. And so for me, to start a school for women and to insist that they learn the same thing that the men learn, it was easy enough. It wasn't, I didn't feel that I was being a revolutionary. But after that, when women came to ask me and they said, Rabbi, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? I said, look, it's your affair. The women can take charge. There's no reason that the revolution should depend on me or people who were there at the beginning. All we had to do was open a door. In this case, all we had to do was open the book. And having opened the book, it all will follow. It will all be as it should be. And it will be. It will be. You see it today. You see steps in the direction of more learning for women, some here and there a step back from learning for women, but it's no longer considered a taboo for women to learn Torah. And that's what's important, what they learn and how they learn, and will they concentrate on halakha, or they concentrate on Gemara, that's their issue. And they will make that decision. Part of the tragedy of yeshiva learning for men is that they don't have a voice. The men don't have a voice. And they're taught not to have a voice, and therefore a lot of them get trounced.
What do you mean by that?
Well, people get to know themselves a little bit. It's very hard for a person to understand why he should forego his natural abilities and talents to do something that he doesn't really want to do. But I think his teachers generally are not willing to deal with that question, and that causes a lot of unhappiness. And unhappiness is not one of the purposes of education. Yes, Torah learning is more important than other things. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you talent, it's hard to imagine that it's purposeless for you to pursue that talent and ability. It may be that you need a little help and direction, but right now, very few people are willing to provide that kind of help and direction, and that's the advantage that women have in Torah learning, because no one would look askance upon women learning Torah and combining that Torah learning with some other talent, other skill, other ability. Quite the contrary, we see it happening. You say somebody mentioned Matthew Miller before. You could ask Matthew how many women he has who write books of Torah importance. And you'll be amazed to find out what the result of the answer to that question is. So we have to open doors. Those of us who are able to open the doors. That's what we should do. And that's also something I always insisted in the yeshiva, I think, and in Bruria as well. You teach. What do you teach? There's always this question like, what should I teach? What should I teach? What are we learning? And so there's this word that I despise called curriculum, which is deus ex machina of what is supposed to happen now. So in Israel, if you've learned Sefer Dvarim 16 times by the time you're 7 years old, but it says in the curriculum that that's what you're supposed to do, that's what you do. Curriculum is a very bad idea. What is a good idea is that people should teach first things that they know. Second thing, even more important, they should teach things that they love. And no student can stand back against a teacher who's teaching what he knows and what he loves. Every student will go for it. Curriculum, on the other hand, is a disaster. And since in Jewish studies, basically, we don't have to have a curriculum. I mean, maybe in math or physics, even then, I'm sure that we could find a compromise position. But for us who are teachers of Torah, the Torah doesn't have a curriculum. The Torah has to be loved, has to be appreciated, has to be wondered at. There was this man that I learned one Seder with my son in the Mir Yeshiva. Mir Yeshiva is a very big yeshiva in Yerushalayim. And what they did, what the Rosh Yeshiva doesn't, Tzvi Finkel Zichrono Livracha, is he allowed the students to set up chaburot, groups, in which each group went the way that the students wanted to go. Students wanted to know halacha, or they wanted to know this halacha, or that halacha. So you had all these groups learning. Everybody was learning what they wanted to learn and was where they wanted to be. And that produced a tremendous amount of energy in the various Batei Midrash. I'm not saying that the mere solution is a good solution for everybody, but I think that that's the criteria. That's the criteria. If you can't teach what you know and you can't teach what you love, then you should not be a teacher.
You both very eloquently answered my question and very cleverly dodged the thorn at the end, which was about the future of women's learning. So let me rephrase it in a more pointed way, the way that a few people had in the submitted questions. In 20 years from now, like it or not, do you believe that in the mainstream modern Orthodox community, there will be women rabbis?
That's it.
I can't
That's what it
understand you.
comes
Write
to.
me a note. He hasn't. Here, switch microphones.
What?
Switch microphones.
I certainly believe that in less than 20 years, there will be women Morot Torah, women who will give halachic direction. We have them now. We have them here now as well. I have a difficulty.
I'm not asking you to tell us what you would like to see. I'm asking you to predict the future.
I'm predicting.
In 20 years from
I'm
now, there will
predicting.
be women rabbis in the mainstream modern Orthodox.
No, you're well. You have to let me explain.
Okay.
That's not fair. That's not fair. You see, every word is very much charged. If you would ask me, do I think that there will be women who are musmachot in Torah learning and Torah knowledge in Arba Chelkei Shulchan Aruch, and will be able to paskin like most rabbis are supposed to be able to do, then my answer would be absolutely yes. And it's already happening. It's already happening, and it will be happening much more. Absolutely. My difficulty with the term rabbi is that there has been, I think Rabbi Bravender is correct, we opened up a door, but we went beyond the door. And it was much of a revolution. When we started teaching Gemara to women in America with my Kolelet and in Israel with Bruria, I believe it was the only place where women could come and study Torah Sheba'al Peh on that level. So it was more than opening up a door, because it became a revolution, because there are many more institutions that are doing that today. What I don't believe is that Judaism is egalitarian. There are men rabbis, therefore there have to be women rabbis. I don't believe that. I believe that Judaism sees a complementary relationship between men and women, not necessarily an egalitarian relationship. It's Birkat Kohanim and not Kohanot who rise to bless the congregations, and so on and so on and so on. So here I believe that if what you mean by women rabbis is Morot Torah, halachic direction, the answer is absolutely yes. I would even go so far as to say, and there are many poskim who have already said it, the halacha psuka, for example, in the Nuchoshen Mishpat of the Shulchan Aruch that came out not long ago under the gushpanka of Reb Avram Shapiro of Merkas Harav. I do believe very strongly that there even can be women dayanot as long as they are accepted by the community at large, Roshei Moitzah, etc., and accepted by the people who come to them. But I do not necessarily believe that there will be women rabbis in the sense that just there are male rabbis, there are women rabbis, because there are many things within synagogue life, like Kriyat Torah and Tfilah B'tzibur, that women cannot be motzi men and women, and in a mixed service of men and women, you can't have women doing those things. So I think the language is important, but I do believe, maybe more than what Rabbi Bravenda said, we did more than open a door. I think it was revolutionary. I think what's happening will happen much more, and women's Torah learning will become de rigueur and will add a great deal, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe said it beautifully, to the chesed in halacha.
Rabbi Bravin, did you want to add to that? Disagree with it?
Of course.
If the question is, what will be in 20 years? The answer from a person who doesn't know what he's going to eat for lunch tomorrow, it's got to be no contest. I haven't got a clue. But I think the revolution of Torah learning is important for this additional lesson. The fact that women learn Torah and that there are women who are knowledgeable has not caused a further rift in Am Yisrael. It has not created a dissonance that cannot be overcome. In fact, though they are loath to admit it, I think in the more right-wing schools and the more right-wing educational systems, the respect for women as students is going up. I can't prove it, but that's my intuitive feeling. So that any revolution, could also have negative sides to it. It can sometimes split families. It can create problems of varied kinds. So you have to be careful. You do the revolution, you do what you have to do, you get to where you have to get to, but somehow you have to try to keep things together. Keep things together. I'm impressed. If I go to New York, which I don't do that often recently, in New York they have these big buildings, very big. And in those big buildings there are offices. And in the offices there are cubicles. And in the cubicles there are people who sit and do whatever they do. And in a lot of those offices, about 1 o'clock, they daven mincha. I think that's pretty remarkable. Because they do it. They daven mincha. There's a sign in Manhattan on a bus stop that says that the Chabad, what do they call it? Torah tank? With Torah something like, will be here, parked here at 1 o'clock on Tuesdays for mincha. And you could go in and daven mincha. And I think that there's a revolution there, a sort of a revolution, where we are able to say, we feel that davening mincha, wherever we happen to be, is an important part of life. Now that's a revolution, a quiet revolution perhaps, but a revolution that has to be protected as well. So you have a lot of revolutions going on. Things move very quickly. This is the 21st century, I believe, right? We all have these phones which do everything for us, by us, and soon they'll be davening. The phone will daven for us. We'll have an app, and the phone will daven mincha, and you'll be doing whatever you do. So in this world, that'd be 20 years. 20 years is more than a lifetime. Who knows what will happen? But there are a lot of revolutions. What I just meant to say was there's a lot of revolutions going on. And within all those revolutions that are going on, some of us, somewhere, have to protect the stability of the enterprise, which is also important. Like I said, somebody came to me and said, what do you think about davening at the kotel? These kind of women, those kind of women. I said, look, I think everybody should daven at the kotel. I said, what can we do? The women who came to ask me, it's not their fault, it was accidental. So they said, what can we do? I said, well, it's very easy. Just every day, get 1,000 women to go to the kotel and daven. 1,000. Every single day. And see me in 20 years. Everything will be just fine.
Can you hear me on this microphone? Do you notice how nicely they're agreeing about everything? Let me try to highlight something that I think, and in my conversations with each of you before tonight, I think represents a kind of difference in view, if not in value. Rabbi Bravender, you always felt that learning in the yeshiva, in Bruria, was about learning. You said just now that you thought it was about opening the page of the Talmud to women, and women walked through that door, and where they went, that was really up to them. And with that, you're able to give them license to go off, and people went many different directions. But that has nothing to do with you, was the exact phrase you said to me this afternoon. And our friend Nomi Berman actually pointed out that this question is larger than just the gender question of, in the so-called revolution of women's study, what the consequences were, where it led to. Because that represents a point of view, let's call it an educational philosophy, that was equally true for men. You were initially very ambivalent about the idea of creating a smicha kollel in the yeshiva to produce rabbis that were going to go out and serve congregations. You thought the yeshiva was about learning towards learning. And Rabbi Riskin, you always kind of emphasized the idea that it was, without minimizing the value of Talmud Torah Lishma, but it was learning toward ordination, learning toward becoming a teacher or a communal leader or a synagogue rabbi, and in Lindenbaum, learning towards some type of certification, not a rabbinic ordination as we've just heard, but some type of certification, Toanot or the like. And it seems to me that this represents a kind of difference of worldview about the purpose of the institution. So I'm curious how you each kind of came to this position, how you each came to this worldview, and how you saw it work out in practice in the institutions.
I don't think that presenting this as a difference in worldview is accurate. I think I agree with Rabbi Riskin, if that's his position, that that pragmatic training is very important. It's very important that there should be Rabbanim and Dayanim and people who can function in Jewish community service as quality professionals. I mean, all of that is obvious. It was just not what I thought I was supposed to be doing. And that's a different matter. I had no qualms about the fact that people came out of the yeshiva, went into the rabbinate, and did things that were positive in the Jewish community. I mean, I think that's wonderful, and that the training that they received in the yeshiva, the auxiliary training, was probably contributed greatly to that. But I thought in my imagined romantic sense of, romantic means it's not true, and it never happened. But I had this romantic idea that there could be a community of people who were in love with the Torah, and that would guide them in the way they acted out in life. And that was not an obvious or easy experience to grab. And so that at a certain point I may have felt that practical training was counterindicated to the dream that I had, to the romantic dream that I had. I think it was a matter of, I was very, and remain, I think, to a large extent, very naive about, when I think about what was going on in Volozhin. I have a very naive picture in my mind of what was going on in the yeshivas in Europe. But I wanted to give that picture, naive though it may have been, over to students, to the various students. And I felt the problem with women's education that I didn't have that to be romantic about. But okay, be that as may, I think the women did understand on their own the importance of Torah learning, but I understood also that for women, the idea of having some kind of practical goal was an important thing. So I was not opposed, in theory, to the practical aspects of training, but I thought that, I wanted to pass on this romantic notion, everybody knows that if you're in a yeshiva in Europe, like this yeshiva doesn't exist, right? I'm making it up in my head. You're in the yeshiva and you spend 10 years learning in yeshiva, and you go to the Rosh Yeshiva, you say, I've got to go, my wife, my children, I've got to get a job. How do I get smicha? So the Rosh Yeshiva says, well, here's the rabbi in the shtad, go over to him. The rabbi says, what are you doing? How have you been learning? Okay, here's smicha. And he would write out smicha for you, because you were already a Talmud Chacham committed to Torah study. So this is the imaginary scene that I had in my mind that I wanted to pass on to others. And what's wrong? What's wrong with imagination? I mean, what's wrong with passing on a dream to somebody else? Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it didn't actually happen. But it might have happened. Could have happened. That's the dream.
I want to tell you briefly one of my favorite Rabbi Bravender stories. I won't go into the background of it all. He gave it at the dedication of our yeshiva, which is now Yeshivat Machanaim. He once went to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe at the great urging. Rabbi Bravender probably would not like to admit that publicly, but at the great urging of his Rebbitzin, he agreed to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And in the course of that discussion, the Lubavitcher Rebbe asked him, "Was tut ihr? What do you do?" To which Rabbi Bravender responded, I'm learning. The Rebbe asked again, was tut dir? Rabbi Bravender thought the Rebbe didn't hear him. I'm learning. A third time. And even louder, I'm learning. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Bravender clicked and he said, is the Rebbe trying to tell me that if I'm learning, I'm not doing anything? And the Rebbe said, that's exactly what the Rebbe is telling you. That's at least how I remember the story. And I believe that stories have
It's better and better.
I believe that stories have a life of their own. And in one of the books that I've written that is being sold outside, there's an introduction in which I say the same thing. Stories have a life of their own. And I think that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was 100% correct. Teaching, in other words, learning Torah in order to teach Torah and to spread Torah is not practical. It's the source of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. The Rambam defines the mitzvah of Talmud Torah initially from the pasuk V'shinantam levanecha, to teach Torah onwards. That is the real mitzvah. To teach Torah ultimately to the world. That's what I believe with all my heart. And teaching Torah is the best expression, the highest expression of that passion of learning Torah that Rabbi Bravender spoke earlier so eloquently about. That if one really has passion about something, he wants to share it with others. The Rambam says that as well. And therefore, it's very much part of the mitzvah itself. Now, I didn't say that we don't ordain women. We do ordain women. We give them...
Not ordained as rabbis.
That's right, because rabbis are usually those who preside over synagogues. That I have a problem with. But, right, exactly, as long as that's clear. But if one is really excited about learning, he's going to want to teach, naturally. He's going to want to share it with others. And I think that's what the Lubavitcher Rebbe meant as well. And therefore, Gadol Talmud Shemevi Lidei Maaseh. You have to do something with the Torah, spread the Torah, teach the Torah, and that's how the world can be changed.
We have time only for another question or two. If I phrased it too sharply, that this was a difference of worldview instead of difference of maybe perhaps of emphasis, I think there was something, an educational position, in which the two of you were completely simpatico, exactly on the same page. Yeshiva Miftar, and to a certain degree, in the earlier years of Bruria, were known in the 1970s and early 80s as Bal Tshuva institutions. Without getting into the depths of what that means and to what degree that is or is not a useful category. But if that's true, they were countercultural in that regard. There were, of course, many other institutions that young men and young women passing through Jerusalem after the Six-Day War, throughout the 70s up to the 80s, could have landed in. The yeshiva operated, if it was a Bal Tshuva yeshiva, as the softest of the soft cell. No one was ever manipulated. There was an absolute distaste to what, according to rumor, may have gone on in some other institutions. No brainwashing, no manipulation. Tuvia Kaplan once pointed out, I think, very trenchantly, that the greatness of the yeshiva and also Bruria was that everybody felt validated for who they were and where they were going. And people went in very, very different directions, left, right, and center. And nobody ever felt if you didn't fit into a mold, you didn't fit into the institution in ways that were not necessarily replicated in other institutions. And this was something that I believe you both agreed on, and you both came to the institutions with this common sense of what learning and teaching and a Beit Midrash is. How did you come to these ideas? Why did you feel so intuitively this was the right way to teach when it wasn't necessarily de rigueur in every other institution?
It's hard to begin. I'm not sure. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint things of that kind. But as I said, this is the third time that I mentioned that I went to the Yeshiva Flatbush for 12 years. And at the Yeshiva Flatbush in those days, today it's probably not quite the same, there was a variety. The student body was varied, religiously, academically. We were all kinds of people in that setting. And somehow I think, I mean, you have to understand, it was very liberal, Yeshiva Flatbush, from what you would think of today. Rabbi Riskin, however, went to a right-wing institution, right, which I stayed away from. Look, I think that kind of, while it's a little dangerous to send your children to a school that doesn't have a clear-cut ideology, what you might profit from that kind of a school is that even people that you disagree with might be worth listening to and talking to. So it may be that I should give them the thanks for my open-mindedness, if in fact anybody here thinks that being open-minded is an advantage.
For me, it was very simple. I learned it, one of the very important messages I got from Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, actually, my Rebbe's brother. Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. God created the human being in His image. How do you write His image? Capital H or small h? How many say capital H? How many say small h? Most of you aren't saying. I hope that means you aren't thinking. I think it's Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam, that's what Rav Aaron said. Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam b'tzalmo, God created the human being in His image, small h. Because the very next phrase in the pasuk is, B'tzelem Elokim bara oto. He created him in the image of God. So there wouldn't be a repetition of the same thing in the same verse. Which means that part of developing one's Tzelem Elokim is developing one's individuality. That every human being is an individual with individual predilections and talents and gifts. We're not, once they took us to the Schlachtois, to the slaughtering house, and we saw how they made frankfurters. And the animal comes out after it's shechted on one end, and everything comes out. The frankfurters are all exactly the same size. People are not frankfurters. Baruch Hashem. People are different. And I think both of us believed we have to expose everyone to Torah. And everyone will find in the Torah, their niche and the area of their predilection and the area of their gift to the world, hopefully. And therefore, it was very clear to me that Torah will do the magic, and we should allow the people to develop as they develop, and perhaps help them in their development, but in their development, not our development. We dare not try to make everyone in one mold.
You each set out to accomplish and have accomplished so much over long careers. Our tefillah, of course, is that you will continue teaching all of us, accomplishing, building, creating. Whatever the magic of it was, whatever the secret sauce of the Bravender method, and whatever it meant that you understood that the dream always has to exceed, the reality always has to exceed the dream. We and so many others and all of the many people watching online and around the world have all been the beneficiaries of that teaching, of that vision. So before we close, I'd like to ask you both what you tell us, what you tell our teachers, and what word you have for each other. We hope this won't be the last time we're all together, and we hope that we'll have opportunities to get together. Let's say we'll do it every year, David. We'll get together and have a conversation. We'll have an opportunity to learn together and to teach together. So what's your last word for us and for each other tonight?
The most important thing I would say in terms of teaching Torah, which we've spoken about at length this evening, clearly it's very important for the teacher to love Torah. What has to be equally emphasized, he has to love the students. You have to love the people you're teaching. Heyu mitalmidav shel Aaron, ohev shalom, rodev shalom, ohev et habriot, love humanity. The Mishnah in Avot is saying that Torah is ultimately for all of humanity, and bring them close to Torah. And you can't do it unless you love your students as well. And both of us have chosen Chinuch as the source, very important source of our, not our livelihood as much as our lives. And I think the most important thing is, of course, love of Torah, but love of the student, first and foremost. And that's what you have to look for in any teacher of any of your loved ones.
Bravender, closing thoughts?
A light note. Is that all right?
We would expect nothing less.
Well, imagine that if, we're granted long life, Rabbi Riskin and I, and in 20 years from now this occasion comes up again, you'd have to have the dais lowered so it would work for the wheelchairs, You come in.
Room for Filipinos.
So my wish is that in 20 years, when we try to have this conversation again, people call me up on the phone, they say, Rabbi, we would love to come, but we're too busy learning Torah.
Thank you both very much. Thank you to all of you. Again, thank you to Or Torah Stone and David Katz, to our friends from Koren Publishers who are up here with their fine wares. We hope we'll have opportunities to get together and learn again. And thank you both, Rabbi Riskin, Rabbi Bravender, Erev Tov.